Good morning to everyone, to this local review body for the 20th of December 2022. Before we start, may I apologise for the delay in starting this morning. We had a few technical issues with our IT, probably because we're almost at Christmas. Somebody's playing a joke perhaps, but there we are. We're back in a different room, and again, my apologies for the delay. If I may then start by making some introductions this morning. First of all, I am Councillor Bob Braun. I am the convener of the local review body. To my left, I have Councillor Hugh Anderson, and to my right, Councillor David Cuthbert. We are all members of the planning committee and are required to do so, to be on this review body. To my far left is Mr. Ross Burton. Mr. Burton is an independent planning advisor. He has had no involvement with any of these cases until they came through to appeal for the review body. To my far right is Mr. Elliott, who is our legal advisor this morning, and to his right is Ms. Jess Guild, our committee services representative. My next thing is, if I may ask, do we have any declarations of interest this morning? Councillor Anderson.
None.
Councillor Cuthbert.
None.
Thank you. And I too have none either. We now come to the minutes of the previous meeting. Now, only Councillor Anderson and I were there, so Councillor Anderson, are you happy with the minutes?
Happy with the minutes.
I certainly am, so that's the minutes approved. We now proceed then, as we have a full agenda, to the first item this morning, which is item 4.1, and these are alterations to a flat at 16 Dundee Road, Perth. Mr. Burton, could I ask you to introduce the case?
Thank you, Chair. I'll take you through some photographs first, which should appear on the screen. So, the opening shot, as usual, is an aerial photograph showing the application site, but outlined in red. It's a small building adjacent to the larger building, the Travel Lodge. It's actually, and it is part of the Travel Lodge in terms of ownership. Next picture, please. Taken from the road, you can see the application building property to the front, right beside the traffic light. You can see the two dormers that are already in place on the roof, and the Velux window that you can see there is where the third dormer is proposed, which is the subject of this appeal. Next slide, please. A close-up of that, just showing the roof in a bit more detail, to show the dormers in a bit more detail. So they come down pretty much onto the wall head. They've got tiled sides and cheeks rather, and a tiled roof, small window in each. Next slide, please. That is the Velux window, which would be replaced by a dormer if this were to be approved. It lights a living room inside the building. Next slide, please. Just showing it in a bit more context with the Travel Lodge behind, and the high wall along the road and to the front. Next slide, please. And that's it. Okay. So the proposal in front of you is for the addition of a third dormer on the northern-facing roof slope of the two-storey building attached to the Isle of Skye Travel Lodge. The upper floor of the application property has been formed into a one-bedroom flat. The proposed dormer would light the living room. Two dormers were installed following a 2018 application to use the former dentist surgery as a flat. The initial design included a third dormer as proposed here. This was removed by the applicant following consultation with the planners. The proposed dormer would match the two existing dormers in size and design. To summarise the applicant's case, the applicant points out that the building originally had dormers on the north slope of the roof, which when it was built as a primary school in 1804. Historical photographs, some showing dormers, are on pages 15 to 18 of today's papers. The applicant takes the view that as the proposed dormer meets the historical character of the original building, the review should be allowed. To summarise the report of handling, the application property is located in a conservation area. Policies: Policy 1, placemaking; Policy 5, developer contributions; Policy 17 residential areas and Policy 28 conservation areas. Section 64(1) of the Planning List of Buildings and Conservation Areas Act 1997 is relevant. Requires planning authorities to pay special attention to the desirability of preserving or enhancing the character or appearance of the designated conservation area. The key issue is the impact the proposal would have on the conservation area. While the building is unlisted, it has a distinctive historical character and is in a prominent location. The dormer, which is the subject of this application, was removed following discussion between the applicant, the case officer and the conservation officer during the previous application in 2018, which granted permission for the change of use. The third dormer was requested to be removed to ensure that the historical character of the conservation area was protected. Policy 28 of the Local Development Plan looks to ensure that the character and appearance of the conservation areas are either enhanced or protected by new development. It's considered that the proposed new dormer neither enhances nor protects the character and appearance of the conservation area, so is contrary to Policy 28 as well as government guidance. Representations: there were no public representations received. Material considerations: Policy 28 of the Local Development Plan and the government guidance, including Section 64(1) of the List of Buildings and Conservation Areas Act 1997, are material. Historic Environment Scotland also produces guidance in the form of the document Historic Environment Policy for Scotland. That document contains 6 specific policies which seek to ensure, Policy HEP4, that any changes to a historic asset should be managed in a way that protects the historic environment. If detrimental impact on the historic environment is unavoidable, it should be minimised. Observations: the photographs submitted by the applicant show that the building originally had a number of dormers on the north-facing roof slope. This is relevant in a historical context, but its relevance in taking a decision today on whether the addition of a third dormer, matching the 2 already in place, but closer to the present road, is acceptable in the context of the historic building within the conservation area. Its relevance within that is limited. The decision to be taken today is whether the additional dormer would enhance or harm the appearance of the conservation area. Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you very much. Do you have any questions, Councillor Anderson?
Well, having looked at the photographs and looked at the actual site, I remember it some time ago when it had the Isle of Skye Hotel, which was antique, went up a wooden stair to the bar. There's been many changes in that area over the period, and the Isle of Skye, the Travelodge now, is quite a striking change in what used to be there. I also minimise what changes are coming up on this application.
We need to have a question.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry.
The Isle of Skye doesn't retain any listing at all now.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Councillor, any further question? No?
That's
Councillor Cuthbert.
Just one question. The aerial view, the 3, I guess, are they dormers, or are 2 of them dormers and 1 of them a Velux? They all look the same from up.
That aerial view shows them before the dormers were installed, so that shows 3 Veluxes.
Okay, thank you.
No further questions? No further questions. I take it the 2 dormers that are there have recently been put in, and not the originals.
They were put in following the 2018 application to use the flat as a residential flat.
Okay. So I have no further questions. So members, then, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require any further information? Councillor Anderson?
happy to proceed. Yeah.
Councillor Cuthbert?
Happy to proceed.
Yeah, and I too am happy to proceed. So on this one, I'll lead off. It's a building that I drive past virtually every time I come to Perth, because I come across the bridge, and I have to be honest, never really gave it a second glance, so I didn't know the history of it. Looking at the photographs here, we obviously see that there were dormer windows in place in the past at some stage, and I presume they were taken out and replaced by Velux windows, and then in subsequent to that, obviously we've had further dormers put back in. My own thought on this from when I read it, and I'm not sure whether the officer saw these photographs, but my thoughts would be that putting the dormer back in would help restore it back to how it originally looked. And I have to say, yes, it is a conservation area. Yes, it is a listed building. But the question is, would people really bother about the existing dormer being put in? Would people notice it? Would they bother about it? They drive past it, of course, every day. We have to care about listed buildings, obviously. But in this instance, I think the replacement of the dormer instead of a Velux skylight would improve the appearance of the site and help to bring it back to its original appearance. So I'm of a mind to grant the appeal on this one, in my opinion. The only thing I would say is, and I presume it would be done anyway, is that the dormer be put in with materials that match the existing two dormers, but I'm sure that would be done anyway. Councillor Anderson, your thoughts?
I concur wholly with what Vina has said. It will enhance the building if we get the 3 dormers in the line proposed. So I support. Appeal.
Thank you. Councillor Cuthbert.
Yes, I agree with you entirely. I think it will enhance the conservation area. I think it's incongruous at the moment with the 2 dormers and then the Velux. So putting a third Velux will actually complete the visual aspect of it. So I would also uphold the appeal.
Thank you very much. So, Mr. Miller, we have a majority of unanimous decision in this case.
Yes, thank you, convener. I think that's unanimous decision to grant the review and it be subject to suitable conditions and informative.
Yes, including the materials that get matched.
On the basis that you consider it accords with the development plan.
Exactly. Thank you very much. Right, members, thank you very much for that. We'll now progress to the next paper, which is paper 4.2. And this relates to the alterations and extensions to a dwelling house at 1 Glebe Terrace in Perth again. Mr. Burton, if you could introduce this one.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take you through the photographs first. It's a 2-storey house and a site extension is proposed. The house is at the corner of Glebe Terrace and Mance Road, as you can see there, and the extension would be on the Mance Road side, so it would be moving closer to Mance Road. What that picture does show, that picture shows the application site. What it doesn't show is the conservation area boundary, which is on the other side of Mance Road and the other side of Glebe Terrace. So it's this application property is out with the conservation area, but adjacent to it. Next slide, please. This is the rear of the house, but this is where the access is taken from. Yeah, the extension would go on the gable that you can see there, and it would extend to pretty much the edge of the property. So where you can see there's a kind of lean-to fence just outside of the lamppost. That's the extent of the applicant's property, and the extension would extend to that. The drawings show the proposed extension would be a slight step down from the ridge height that you see there, but it would be a 2-storey extension. Next slide, please. This slide shows the gable quite clearly. It's the gable currently is the same stone as the rest of the house. It also shows the height difference between the pavement and the road and the extension. You can see it's sloping upwards from the road at this point, so the height difference is quite substantial. It's probably about head height, the flow level of the extension, if you're standing on the footpath. Next slide, please. And this is from the other side, the front of the house, which is in this case the private garden of the house. The extension would be to the left of the house, as you see it there. A balcony is proposed at upper floor level, which would overlook the applicant's garden ground, and it would be a simple projecting balcony. Next slide, please. Just a close-up of that, showing a bit more clearly the extent of the where the extension would be. The fence is visible on the left-hand side there, and the extension would come out to pretty much where the fence is shown. The structure that's shown in that area would obviously be removed. Next slide, please. And this is the view from the road. As you can see, standing on the footpath, your view is of a pretty substantial hedge, which is shown on the drawings as remaining. Next slide, please. Okay, we're back to the aerial picture. So a two-storey extension is proposed to a two-storey semi-detached house at the corner of Glebe Terrace and Mance Road. The extension would accommodate a garage at ground level and a bedroom with ensuite bathroom and balcony on the upper floor. The extension would be stepped back from the frontage of the house to Glebe Road and would be finished with smooth cement render in a colour to match the stone of the existing house and timber cladding. The timber cladding would be on the Glebe Terrace side of the extension, wrapping round halfway around the Mance Road frontage, and the smooth cement render would be the other half of Mance Road and along the frontage of the house facing Brompton Terrace. The application property is in an elevated position from Mance Road. The existing gable is partly obscured view from Mance Road by mature planting. To summarise the applicant's case, the design of the extension and the proposed materials make it clear that the extension is ancillary to the main house and will ensure that it blends in with the house's stone finish and with the trees in the adjacent conservation area. The wooden cladding proposed will also ensure that its impact from Mance Road is minimised, as it will blend in with the landscaping on the boundary, which is to be retained. The extension will occupy an area of hard standing which once had consent for a garage. Taking this and the design of the materials proposed into account, it will improve the appearance of this part of the property and will enhance the appearance of the immediate area. The applicant considers that, contrary to the first reason for refusal, the proposal complies with Policy 1A, placemaking, and Policy 17, residential areas. The application property is not within the conservation area, which it's separated from by mature trees. The proposal will not therefore impact on the character or appearance of the conservation area. Given this and the design and materials proposed, it's considered to comply with Policy 28, conservation areas. According to the Canoe Conservation Area Appraisal, April 2010, there do not appear to be any historic assets as referred to in Policy 31 adjacent to the site. The applicant considers that there is no conflict between the proposal and Policy 31, which is the third reason for refusal. It's also noted that assessment against this policy is not supported by the report of handling. To summarise the report of handling, the proposed extension will appear squeezed into the space which exists at the side of the house. The contrasting contemporary design and protruding balcony area will clash and detract from the character and appearance of the main house and will appear visually intrusive within the wider street scene. As a result, the proposal is considered to be contrary to Policies 1A and 1B, placemaking, and Policy 17, residential areas. Policy 28A of the Local Development Plan plans all development within and those out with which will impact on a conservation area to be appropriate and sympathetic to its appearance, character and setting. In this instance, it is considered that the proposals will not preserve or enhance the character, appearance or setting of the adjacent conservation area by reason of the proximity to the lower set road, resultant oppressive scale of the extension, inappropriate contemporary design and unsympathetic choice of materials. Policy 31, which relates to other historic environment assets, is also relevant. It states that non-designated historic assets will be protected and preserved as far as possible in situ wherever feasible. There are no issues regarding residential amenity. No public representations were received in the application. To turn to the material considerations, Policy 1A and B, placemaking and material considerations. Policy 17, residential areas, seeks to protect residential amenity, which the case officer has pointed out is not an issue with this proposal. Policy 28, conservation areas, relates according to its wording to developments within conservation areas, so it is of limited relevance. Policy 31 relates to non-designated historic assets and areas of historic interest, including historic landscapes, other gardens and design landscapes, historical woodlands and routes which do not have statutory protection. It is of limited relevance at best here. Some observations on the proposal. The report of handling states there are no residential amenities with the proposal, including the proposed balcony. The decision which needs to be taken is whether the proposed extension is contrary to the local development plan's placemaking policies and whether or not it has any impact on the adjacent conservation area. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Thank you very much. Councillor Cuthbert, any questions?
Yeah, just for clarity, could you confirm that is it or is it not a heritage asset?
It doesn't appear to be. It's not listed, as was pointed out by the applicant, in the conservation area appraisal, and it wouldn't appear to warrant the designation in itself as a historic asset.
Okay, thank you. The other question, if you could move to the slide that shows the road going past. Okay. The one that shows the current building. I think it's the next slide possibly.
Okay, could we see the next slide, please?
Yes, that one. Thank you.
Okay.
Am I right in thinking that the building is going to extend more or less to the lamppost and it's going to be sort of the height from the road, which is a person's head height?
Yeah, I think it would be short of the lamppost. You can see to the left-hand side of the lamppost there's a fence,
Right.
and that fence line delineates the edge of the driveway. From the drawings, it looks to me as if that is approximately the extent of the proposed extension.
Okay.
And you can see in that picture there is actually somebody walking on the road just below the house. So you can see from that, it gives a sense of scale. You can see the level of that person's head is roughly equivalent to the ground level where the extension would sit.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Anderson?
Well, I just wondering, looking at the plan, what room when that extension is put onto the right-hand side of the house with view now, what space is there between that and the edge? Is there a walking space or
Between
the extension's built onto the side of the house
if the extension were built all the way, I
on
don't.
the right-hand side of it there?
I don't think there would be space for a pathway within the property.
Uh-huh.
I think there should be.
It's very close in the drawings anyway. It's hedges brushing the extension.
I think.
Drawings
I mean, there is access to the garden at the front of the house
from the
from
front.
the front. You don't have to come through the side to gain access to it. But I think you're correct. I don't think there would be the possibility of access through that side, front to back.
And also the height of it, it's this building that's going to be stuck underneath the projections of the existing roof.
Yeah, the drawings show it step down a little.
Yeah, there's a
Yes,
step on it
step down
and set back at the
and
front.
step back at the front as well. That's correct.
These lovely velvet windows in the roof space.
Yes, there are. There's windows in there. Yeah, correct.
Any further questions?
That's
Bless you. Question, Mr. Burton. Probably you can't really answer it, but that with it being so close to the road, I mean, I presume that the ground base itself is solid enough to take a building. I presume the architect would check that anyway.
That would be an engineering
Yeah.
concern, and I presume that yes, as you say, I'm guessing the architect has made the calculations and has assured that.
It's very close.
It is very close, but you know, there is a retaining wall there already, I believe. And I would guess if planning permission is granted, it's more of a building standards issue.
Yes.
But that would be part of.
Thank you. Well, members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is, the information contained within the papers, the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require any more information? Councillor Cuthbert.
Happy to proceed.
And Councillor Anderson.
I would go for it.
Okay.
Decision.
And I too am happy to proceed. So, Councillor Cuthbert.
Okay, I think the officer's got it right on this occasion. Apart from reason for refusal number 3, if it's not a heritage asset, then that condition wouldn't seem to be applicable. I do feel that the scale, the height, the design and the materials, I mean, they're not in keeping here. And being on the edge of the conservation area, I think we should take into account that it'll have an impact on the conservation area. So my preference is to refuse the appeal.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Anderson?
I'm minded to approve the appeal. And it's a much nicer extension to the properties than the rear extension seen in this development. And it's quite in keeping with the area of the timber being built and the structure of the building shown. And there is space for this, it's comfortable space. And it doesn't affect the frontage, which is the best part of that house as such. And it's quite well designed. And I would go for approval of the appeal.
Okay, thank you both very much. Like yourself, Councillor Anderson, I am of a mind to grant the appeal, but I would only do so if the materials which are being used to construct were matching the existing building. I think the materials proposed in the plan and in the 3D drawings that we have would just make the extension stand out far too much. We have to take into account where it is and its visual aspect from the road. It is quite narrow, it is quite close to the road, and for that reason I would be inclined to, as I say, grant the appeal, but in doing so it would be on the basis only that the materials used to build that extension match the existing house.
I'm looking at Mr. Burton here.
Can we do that? If not,
My initial reaction would be that too significant a change from the actual proposal.
I think I would agree there. The house is built in stone, and to replace the proposed materials with stone would add significantly to the cost. I think I would take advice from our legal representatives that
Yes, but in terms of conditions, there's certain tests for conditions.
yes.
But also you have to think about, whether they're necessary, but also whether it's such a big change that actually it should be refused and allow them to go back with a different design,
I'm with you.
rather than grant. Conditions are there to mitigate certain aspects, but if you're making such a big change, it's no longer the same proposal anymore.
Okay.
And from my understanding of the proposal and from what you've said, you could condition some materials, change some materials, but not the whole lot.
Right.
I think that would be a different proposal. So a matter for you to make your mind up. But having given that advice, if you stick with your view that the material should change to that extent, then that would be a refusal to allow them to come back later on.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. So based on that advice then, Mr. Burton, I too then would have to follow Councillor Cuthbert and refuse the appeal. It's just the visual aspect of the design I find is too intrusive, I think, in the area. As I say, like Councillor Cuthbert, I think on this occasion I would refuse the appeal. But like him, I think refusal number 3 on the refusal notice should be deleted off, and we stick to numbers 1 and 2. So I think on that basis, Mr. Ray, that we have a majority decision in this case.
Yes, I've just been careful, conveners, of what you've said, but would you be content, because they are a wee bit wider, I think you're content with grounds 1 and 2.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at page 74 of your papers, the original ground refusal, and page 75. For virtual scale, it does say scale height design materials in relationship to the existing dwelling house, and you were broad enough in what you said, and although your focus is on materials, but I think you were broad enough that it covers everything within ground 1. Ground 2 is similar, but different policy grounds, but you're agreeing by majority to take out ground 3, and that is not a heritage asset.
No.
So basically by majority refuse. Obviously Councillor Anderson felt it accorded with the development plan, but yes, refused by a 2-1 majority.
Fine. Thank you very much. Members will now move on to item 4.3, which is the erection of a dwelling house and associated works land 85 metres southeast of Whispering Pines in Morecast. Mr. Burton, over to you again.
Yeah, pardon me. Thank you, Chair. take you through the photographs as ever. The application site is in open countryside adjacent to an existing house. Could we see the first slide, please? So you can see the existing house, Whispering Pines, is to the left of the application site. There was historically an old railway separating the two sites. Where the red line meets the road, as you'll see in the photographs, there remains a bridge over the railway, which is underneath the road at that point. Next slide, please. So just to the left, you can see a parapet of the old railway bridge. That's the road that's leading down from that high point, and the application site is on the left, behind the mature trees and post and wire fence. Next slide, please. That's looking further down the road to the gate at the bottom, which gives access to the site at the moment. Next slide, please. And looking upwards towards Whispering Pines, that you can see the application site there is bounded on the left by to left and right by post and wire fence. Where it bounds the road as mature trees, where it bounds onto the field. On the other side, there are a number of trees, but there's no other definition of that. You can see the application site is grassed and level, but there's no. It's not in current use as a garden for Whispering Pines. Next slide, please. Looking into the application site from the road, you can see quite clearly the post and wire fence that defines both of these boundaries, and you can see there's the occasional tree along the boundary as well, and it's open fields beyond. Next slide, please. And again, looking inside the application site, looking towards the hedge that you can see in the distance at the top of the site there, that's the hedge which defines the garden space associated with Whispering Pines. Next slide, please. Okay, we're back to the aerial picture. So what's proposed is the erection of a dwelling house 85 metres south of Whispering Pines, Mockharse. Whispering Pines is a two-storey detached house located approximately 2 miles to the east of Milnathort in open countryside. The application site, which is owned by the owners of Whispering Pines, adjoins the garden of that house, separated by a substantial hedge running along the line of the former railway. The application site is grassed and has the appearance of a garden area, although there is no evidence to suggest it's being used as such. The proposed house is largely single-storey with 3 bedrooms and a large sitting, dining and kitchen area on the ground floor, and a single-room office and a shower room on an upper level. To summarise the applicant's case, while it's acknowledged that the proposed house does not strictly fall within any of the 6 categories within the Housing in the Countryside supplementary guidance, it's considered that the proposed house is in line with that guidance, and the character of the countryside is safeguarded, and that the development is in an appropriate location with high standards of siting and design are achieved. It's noted that the Council's guidance exists to provide guidance and a framework to encourage appropriate development. It's considered that the proposal will result in a building size seen elsewhere in the area. Site layout proposals and proposed dwelling itself complements the adjacent site and dwelling. The attention of the committee is drawn to a similar proposal granted planning permission by the local review body in 2020, in which the committee took the view that the proposal did not constitute urban development, and the proposal, which was a small settlement of Blair Forge, was acceptable when assessed against the local development plan and the Housing and Countryside Guide 2014. To summarise the report of handling, Policy 19 of the Local Development Plan, Housing in the Countryside, is the most relevant policy. It supports the development of a single house in the countryside under 6 categories, only one of which, building groups, is relevant to the proposal. The Council's guidance Housing in the Countryside Supplementary Guidance 2020 defines a building group as 3 or more buildings of a reasonable size. As the adjacent site is occupied by a single house and garage, it does not constitute a building group in terms of the guidance, so the proposal is contrary to policy 19 of the local development plan. The setting, design and materials proposed are considered to be acceptable and in accordance with policies 1A and B placemaking, but as the principle of development is unacceptable under policy 19, that is not a relevant consideration. Reference is made to another decision at Blair Forge, but it is noted that every application must be considered on its own merits and assessed against current planning policy as dictated by the Planning Act. The presence of a decision on a site elsewhere, which was approved under a previous iteration of the Housing in the Countryside policy, is not considered to have any bearing on the assessment of this application. No public representations were received to the application, and material considerations. The overriding policy under which this proposal stands to be assessed is policy 19, Housing in the Countryside. Under that policy, the Council's Supplementary Guidance 2020 is material. Some observations. The police officer is correct to make the point that each application must be considered under its own merits, and that the decision referred to by the applicant was decided under a previous version of the Council's Supplementary Guidance on Housing in the Countryside. It's also the case that the application site at Blair Forge was adjacent to a building group. It was refused because it was considered that the proposal amounted to ribbon development, not because it was not supported under one of the categories which the supplementary guidance allowed. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Questions. We'll look at the questions. Councillor Anderson, any questions?
I just wondered, has there been any reports from the Roads Department with an access to that site? A comment from Roads Department, there's bends on both ends of the site we see up on screen here. So the Spring Pines access is it may be on the pit of the bend and you can see good access left and right, but that site bends at each end of it.
Transport planning had no objection, subject to condition. Transport planning stated that policy 60B of the local development plan seeks to ensure development sites are readily accessible by all modes of transport, particularly walking, cycling and public transport. The sites proposed to be served by the existing access to the southeast, which is not considered to be an appropriate subject, which is considered to be appropriate subject to condition. So the existing field access, which is to the south of the site, as you see it there, where there's a large tree group just at the point of the application site, is where the field access is, and transport planning offer no objection to the proposal on that basis.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Cuthbert.
No, I don't think so. I think I've heard enough.
And I too have no questions on this one. So members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require any further information? Councillor Anderson.
No further information, please.
And Councillor Cuthbert.
I'm happy to proceed.
I too am happy to proceed. So Councillor Anderson, would you like to lead on this one?
I would sustain, no, I wouldn't sustain the appeal. I'm refusing the appeal. And basically on the main thing is housing the countryside policy, but it's totally breaches.
Right. Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Cuthbert.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the site, it's a lovely site for a house, but unfortunately we're bound by the rules of the local development plan and the housing in the countryside rules. So I don't think we can give consent on this occasion. I think to do so might create a precedent. I think the Pickery was given consent for completely different reasons, but to give a consent here would open the floodgates to every single house in Kinrossshire and Perth and Kinross with sitting on their own with a nice area for a house to go in. So I'm afraid I would refuse this appeal.
Thank you very much. It is certainly a nice design of house to go on the site. There's no question of that, but we are bound by the rules of the supplementary guidance. we don't have a building group. We have one single house on its own. And even if we were to extend that and call it a group, if we could do so, then the site itself doesn't have a defined boundary either. So we're looking at two areas where it falls well short of the Scottish supplementary guidance for housing in the countryside. There was mention made, of course, again of the piggery, but again that reason, as you've both said, was different. That was to do with ribbon development, and in that case, looking at the minutes of the local review body, it was allowed because partly because the site had a well-defined boundary in it, which of course this one doesn't have. So I'm afraid on this occasion I'm going to concur with both of you and to refuse the appeal. Just read it. Anything else you need on that one?
Nothing to add. I think that's, sorry, convener, refused in line with the appointed officers ground the refusal, which is page 1, 2, 3
Yes.
papers. I don't think there's anything else to add to that.
Nothing at all. No. Okay, thank you very much. We'll move on now to item 4.4, which is to do with the erection of 2 dwelling houses, a garage and associated works at Dun Community House, Glenfark. Mr. Burton.
Yes, thank you, Chair. As you can, I'll take you through the pictures once again. The application site is quite large, quite extensive. As you can see, it's the grounds of Dunphrevy House. I've included next slide a layout showing the proposal, just so in order that you can see it in context. 2 housing plots are proposed. One to the north of the house for a small house, and one across south of the house for a larger house. You can see that the house on the northern end of the site is fairly close to trees, some of which would have to be removed, and you can see there's also quite a significant area of open space left as garden area for Dunphrevy House. Next slide, please. The access to Dunphrevy House from the main road. You can see it's very much a private driveway with gated pillars at the side. One, you can see the house at the end of the driveway there. The smaller of the houses is proposed to the left-hand side of the planting that you can see, the trees that you can see in front of you. Next slide, please. And this is taken standing in the driveway, looking towards the house. You can see a retaining wall between the house and the driveway there. That retaining wall supports the land which house number 2 would be built on. So it's a bit higher. It's about 1.2 meters higher than the road surface. Next slide, please. That's the site for the smaller of the 2 houses, plot 2. The house would sit forward of the shed that you can see on site, and some of the trees to the left of the hedge there would have to be removed to accommodate the house. Next slide, please. That's taken from in front of the shed, looking across the plot for the house towards the driveway. Next slide, please. And looking across the site towards the house, that's taken from just standing in the entrance to at the edge of the woodland, which marks the edge of the site, looking towards Dunphrevy House. Next slide, please. And that is the view, which would be from the house towards the main house. Next slide, please. That's the house plot. That's the second house plot for the larger house. It is quite clear and the trees and the shrubs at the back are proposed to be retained. Next slide, please. A close-up of that site. The house would sit within that within that site. The fence at the back with the large mature tree would remain and would separate this site from other land associated with the Creevy House. Next slide, please. Standing within the house plot, that's where the house would sit. This is the larger house, a 2-story element and a single-story element. Next slide, please. And that is from within the site looking towards Creevy House. You can see there's an area of garden ground associated with Creevy House in between the two plots. Next slide, please. And that's looking at the site of plot 2, or plot 1 rather, the larger house, from the other edge of it. The Creevy House is to your right in this picture. Next slide, please. And back to the, I don't know if it would be more helpful for that to be on the screen or the yes. So next slide, please. Okay. So the proposal is for the erection of 2 dwelling houses, a garage and associated works at Creevy House. One house located south of Creevy House, the larger house you can see on the plan there, would have 5 bedrooms over 2 floors, a kitchen, dining, living area, a sitting room and a study. The other house, the house to the north of Creevy House, to the north of that of the site there, would be single story, would have 3 bedrooms and a kitchen, dining, living area. The larger house is intended for the applicants who currently live in the Creevy House. The other house would be for sale on the open market or for a family member. Both houses, as you can see there, would be accessed from the driveway that accesses Creevy House, and each would have a separate private garden. The tree survey and impact survey which accompanied the application suggested that 7 trees would need to be removed to accommodate the new houses, 6 for the smaller house and 1 for the larger house. To summarise the applicant's case, the applicant sought pre-application advice, which was that a future planning application for dwelling houses on the site would be considered under section 3.1A of the existing supplementary guidance, which supports the erection of a house within established gardens once associated with the country estate house, and which provide an appropriate landscape setting, but where development would not fundamentally affect the qualities and integrity of the site. The guidance followed a proposal for 4 houses and was taken by the applicant's agent to suggest that an application for a smaller number of houses, such as 2, would be more acceptable to the council. The text of the advice is shown on pages 218 to 220 of your papers. The proposed dwelling houses were sympathetically designed with pitched roofs and materials of stone, white render, timber and slate, chosen to replicate that found on the Creevy House and elsewhere in the village. The larger of the 2 houses is designed to resemble 2 smaller connected rural buildings and to minimise the visual impact. The ridge height of the 2-story element is kept below that of the existing Creevy House. The proposed layout preserves existing planting to screen the new house from the Creevy House. The smaller dwelling house is designed to nestle on the edge of the trees and is screened from the public road by the woodland. It is located to the west of Creevy House with gable facing gable to avoid creating any privacy issues. It sits on an existing area of slightly raised ground where an existing timber garden room shed is allowed. This would be removed without planning permission. It's considered that the design of new houses and their setting within mature trees means it complies with policy 1A placemaking. The case officer has, under the newly adopted supplementary guidance on housing countryside, assessed the proposal under building groups rather than section 3.1 as it was originally assessed when pre-application advice was sought. The applicant and agent were not informed of this change in assessment criteria. The case officer made 2 fundamental errors in assessing the application. 1, that the larger house necessitated removing a band of mature woodland to the south of the plot, and 2, that the smaller house would be erected on a raised site, which requires significant fastworks. In point of fact, the tree belt to the south of the larger house is proposed to remain, and the site of the smaller house is already raised and would not be raised further. Given this, the proposal is considered to comply with the local development plan policies 1A and 1B, placemaking, and policy 19, housing in the countryside. To summarise the report of handling, the site lies in the landward area of the adopted Perth and Kinross local development plan. As such, the proposal fails to be considered under policy 19, housing in the countryside, and its associated 2020 supplementary planning guidance on housing in the countryside. Pre-application advice offered in 2019 suggested that the proposal could fall within category 3.1 of policy 19, which supports the erection of a house within established gardens once associated with a country or estate house. Advice was given that the development supported under this category would normally be for a single house. The grounds of Duncrevie House are relatively modest and cannot realistically accommodate additional multiple houses without fundamentally affecting the qualities and integrity of the site. The building group section of the housing in the countryside guidance supports the development of houses which extend a building group into a readily definable site formed by existing topography, roads or existing landscape. In this case, the site boundary includes the wooded grounds of Duncrevie House as well as part of an adjacent field. This section in particular appears to be unrelated to the proposed development and does not meet the criteria for being part of a readily defined adjacent site. The landscape that provides the setting for Duncrevie House also contributes to the setting of the adjacent building group, which would be compromised by the proposed development, as the proposed houses would impact on the wider landscape with extensive tree and shrub removal and ground engineering within the site, affecting the setting of Duncrevie House. In addition, the resultant residential amenity of the new houses would be severely affected by the retained trees, which would be likely to lead to pressure for further tree felling. The proposed development do not therefore affect policies 1A and 1B, placemaking, or policy 17, housing in the countryside. Now, 35 representations from 26 households were received. 3 of those supported the proposal. The remainder objected on the following grounds: traffic and road safety, ecological impact, residential amenity, impact on water supply, overdevelopment, out of character, loss of visual amenity, and decrease in property value. Material considerations: policy 17, housing in the countryside, and policies 1A and 1B, placemaking, are relevant. Among the objections, concern over road safety, ecological impact, residential amenity, overdevelopment, and visual amenity are material. Some observations. The pre-application advice offered in response to a proposal for 4 houses mentioned in section 3.1 of the supplementary guidance supports the development. I mentioned section 3.1 of the supplementary guidance, which supports the development of a house or houses within the original garden ground associated with an existing country or estate house. The advice stated, it is likely that justification could be made for a house under this part of the housing in the countryside policy. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. Okay, Councillor Cuthbert, any questions?
Yeah, first of all, will there be any shrub removal in the works?
The house to the north of Duncrevie House, the smaller of the 2 houses, would require shrub and tree removal, yes.
Okay, and roughly how many trees would be removed?
The applicant's report says 7 altogether.
7?
Yes.
Okay, and that's out of how many?
I believe something like over 40 anyway.
Right, so what, 10?
74, sorry, 74.
74, so roughly 10%. Okay, the other thing is the question of the Clifford Bray access to the site. There was mention, I believe, of passing places. Is that something that could be conditioned were we to give this permission?
It could be conditioned if the land is either owned by the applicant or under the control of the council, if it's part of a adopted road. Passing places within the grounds of Duncrevie House could be easily accommodated because the applicant owns that. Out with that, if the land is part of the adopted road and verge, then yes, it could be.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Anderson?
Just want the plan becoming shown on the screen just now. The red lines, is that the existing access roads to Duncrevie House?
Existing access road is shown in grey.
In grey, and
Yes,
what the red lines are for then?
That would be That's for, that is for a change. That's for an amended access to the house south. So
So it's,
it would be a,
so it's coming off. The corner widening the section to the house number 2, the north house. And there's other lines up there as well,
yeah,
red line.
it does appear to be that, Councillor. To be honest with you, I'm not entirely sure what they're intended to show, because it also shows a driveway accessing a garage for the main house, taken off the existing driveway.
Yes, because when we were looking at the front of Duncreevy House, looking across,
Yes,
there's no border hedge.
not on the site of the new house proposed, but there was planting on the side
There's
of the previous
light
house.
planting on the side.
The Duncreevy House side, yes.
So I think the Duncreevy House is going to lose a lot of its privacy and everything else.
I think you're correct, Councillor. I think what's shown there is the red line is showing the existing road and the grey line is showing the new. So you're correct. It would eat into the land in front of Duncreevy House.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's,
but there's no real technical rules on distance between windows, looking to other houses.
well,
The
there's,
house that we're moving out of, we're supposed to move out of Duncreevy House to the new one. It's looking right across that
yeah,
past house.
it's looking direct, it's looking at a slight angle.
Yeah,
But generally, approaching 18 metres is looked for between windows of habitable rooms, privacy. That would
to be safe on that.
that would be safe on that point, yes.
But the other cottage,
Well,
number
that's-
2 north, there are windows on the Creevy House looking to the north as well.
The applicant states in his case that it's gable to gable. So there'll be no privacy issues. If there are no windows in the gable of the new house,
No,
then there will be no privacy issues that way.
thank you, but well, I think it was that just now, but
Okay. Well, the applicants are talking about moving into the larger new house.
Yes.
As a for life home, I think they call it.
I think so, yeah.
And they're obviously presuming family or sell the other one. Are they giving any indication what's happened to Duncreevy House itself?
I presume, no, they haven't.
No.
I presume that would be just sold, but I don't know.
Right, okay. Okay, that was my only question really. So members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is, the information contained within the papers, the presentation by the planning officer, or do we require more information? Councillor Cuthbert
I'm happy to proceed.
and Councillor Anderson.
I'm happy to proceed.
I too am happy to proceed on this one, and I'll lead on this one. It's a substantial amount of information to digest on this case. And much has been made, I think, of the original pre-application report to work on the section 3.1 of the supplementary guidance. But it does, I think, mention that it's normally applies to one house and also to a substantial estate or former estate. And I think, having seen the photographs, and obviously the planning officer felt the same, I don't think you could describe this as a major estate in layman's terms. But even so, that would only support perhaps for one house. I have to say, having looked at the plans and photographs, I am inclined to consider the officer's points, I think, and I think they are well made out. The site does seem to be, at this stage, overwhelmed by housing or confined to one grouping, which makes it seem, use the word claustrophobic, but it seems overwhelming for the site. So I am inclined, I think, at this stage to refuse the appeal. It may, as I say, a single house on the site may have been possible, but that's up to planners to look at another planning application. But as it stands at the moment, I feel I have to refuse the appeal, using the reasons for refusal as per the planning officer. And I think there's something perhaps we could slightly amend in there, depending on the information we have, but we'll see how my colleagues go before we go along that route. Councillor Cuthbert.
I agree with you, convener. I think I don't quite understand what that smaller house is doing in there. It's sort of it's a bit odd in the location. It's very close to the main Duncreevy house. I'm concerned about the numbers of trees being taken out. If you're taking out 10% of the trees, that's quite a high number. I'm also worried about the road access. I think if this application had just been for one house, perhaps the bigger, the two that were in there, that might be something I would have considered differently. So in principle, I would refuse the appeal. I do think we need to amend the wording of the reasons for refusal, but we can come to that later.
Okay. Councillor Anderson.
I concur with both of you and use the appeal and see what comes back from that after that. But present as it's set out for us, I would refuse it.
Okay, fine. Thank you very much. So we have a unanimous decision again, Mr. Elliott, but I think we seem to feel there should be slight change to the reasons for refusal. I'll get my words out in a minute.
Yes, Convener, I think obviously you have an unanimous decision to refuse. I'll take you to page 255, 256. You have 3 reasons for refusal. Maybe start with yourself, Convener, because you indicated potential changes.
I think number 1, as it is. I think number 2, I think we should add in perhaps at the where on the second line where we come to local development plan 2 2019 and add in there and the associate housing in the countryside supplementary guidance of 2020.
Yes.
And further in, if I may suggest, bear in mind the comments made in the appeal and missing information perhaps on line 4th up from the bottom. It says extend, at the moment it says landscape setting due to extensive tree and shrub removal. I think and shrub I would take out and the rest of that sentence. So it ends at tree removal and then we go into in addition the resultant residential amenity.
So you're content with ground.
And condition refusal 3 left as it is.
So my understanding, Convener, is what you're suggesting is ground 2 is altered. So in the second line, it then reads local development plan 2 2019 and the associated housing countryside supplementary guidance 2020. I think it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's line 6 into line 7.
Yep.
So that would then read impact on the wider landscape setting due to extensive tree removal. Then it would stop.
Full stop. That's it.
But you would still have the last sentence.
In addition to yes, again, yeah.
Okay, Councillor Cuthbert and Councillor Anderson, are you content with that?
I'm content. Yep.
Yes. Okay.
Oh, thank you very much. So we'll now move on to the next item, which is 4.5, which is the extension to a dwelling house and erection of porch at Sunny Hall, Kinnaird in Exchequer. Mr. Byrne, if you'd like to lead.
Thank you, Chair. I must preface my presentation by saying this is the first application that's come before that I've dealt with for the local review body where I haven't actually been able to access the site. I tried to, but I couldn't get on site on the day I visited. However, the applicant and agent have been kind enough to supply pictures, which I can show you now. So first slide, please. You can see the site. It's quite remote. It's a very long driveway leading to it. It's part of the reason I couldn't access it. I got as far as a locked gate, which is still a long way from the house. So that's as far as I could get. Next slide, please. Now, the driveway leading up to the house is a single track driveway. Next slide, please. And you can see the house nestling around the corner of the driveway. There, the roof of the house. Next slide, please. That's another shot. You can see the house at the top of the picture there. So you get some idea of the remoteness of the house, and it is surrounded by land as well. Next slide, please. So looking down towards the house from above, you can see it's also screened by trees. It's part of a sheep farm. That's the applicant is a sheep farmer. Next slide, please. So the access to the house itself, you can see it's a single story, fairly traditional looking cottage. Next slide, please. And what you're looking, the gable that you're looking at here is the gable that the main part of the extension would be built on. On the left-hand side, you can see there's a kind of bay, a bay window lounge area. That was, that I understand, was an earlier extension to the house. There would also be a porch built on that side of the house, and on the other side of the house, which you can't see just now, there would be a further extension, which would be a conservatory, kind of lean-to conservatory. The extension that we built onto this gable would be slightly wider than the gable as it is just now. Next slide, please. That's showing the same gable from a slightly different angle. Next slide, please. And that's showing the existing front door. The gable would, the porch would be built exactly there, and the new extension would be built to the right-hand side. Next slide, please. And this is looking at the this is looking towards the same gable, the front of the house and the gable. So the porch would be in front of the blue door that you see there, and the extension would be built out from that gable. Next slide, please. And that's looking at the earlier extension of the house, which is an extension to the lounge, and the extension will be beyond that, looking towards the hillside. Next slide, please. And this is where the conservatory extension would be. It would be built out as a lean-to extension from the house, in essence, filling that gap. Next slide, please. And looking at it from the hillside, you can see the house and beyond it the outbuildings, which are fairly extensive. So the extension would be towards the camera here. It would be built out from that gable. Next slide, please. And here we're back at the aerial photograph. So the proposal is for a side extension to the existing farmhouse, which is single story. The house currently has a bedroom, kitchen, dining room, living room, and bathroom, and has extensive outbuildings. The extension proposed to be attached to the gable would add 2 bedrooms with ensuite bathrooms, a reception, drawing room, and a book room, linen rooms. The conservatory is also proposed to the rear of the house, which would be a single room conservatory, and a porch to the front of the house. The extension would match the height of the existing house, and the materials proposed would match the existing. Because the extension would be wider than the existing house, a mansard roof is proposed to ensure the roof height matches that of the existing. To summarise the applicant's case, taking account of the entirety of the full extent of the buildings on site, the farmhouse and buildings and outbuildings, the extension is not considered to overwhelm the existing structure as is claimed. The roof height and materials have been chosen to match the existing house, while creating a house which will continue to meet the needs of the applicant. To summarise the report of handling, the extension proposed on the east elevation seeks to form a second level by doubling the planned depth of the original cottage. This would create an increased roof volume, and the proportions of this extension would be excessive in comparison to the original cottage. The proportion, scale and visual massing of the extensions taken cumulatively would overwhelm the modest cottage and would detract from its character and appearance. The proposal is therefore contrary to policies 1A and 1B placemaking. The roof of the cottage has the potential for bat roosts. As no bat survey has been submitted, it's not possible to assess any potential impact on bats and bat roosts, so the application is contrary to policy 41 of the local development plan. No public representations were received. Material considerations, policies 1A and 1B placemaking and material, and policy 41 biodiversity is also potentially relevant if there are any protected species such as bats which would be affected by the proposed extensions. Observations, the building which is proposed to be extended was originally a small cottage, which has previously been extended in order to provide a reasonable quality of accommodation. The decision for the committee today is to decide whether the extensions proposed here would have an unacceptable impact on the building as it is, and on whether the bat survey mentioned by the case officer would be required before any building takes place. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We'll open up for questions. Councillor Anderson?
Yeah, just wonder if there's any core paths, or I say it's the route up to the house. It's quite an open path for people to walk. Should have access to it.
Not as far as I'm aware, councillor. There's no mention of that in any of the papers. So I don't know.
And do the people use this area for walking at all? Is it?
When I was trying to get there wasn't a soul around, I have to say, and it wasn't a bad day. But so I can't answer for that. I don't know if there are paths that ramblers use in the area.
Because in essence, it's not visible to anyone in residing around the area, and
No.
it's an invisible hidden house. So my concern would be the mention of bats. You know, because they can cause quite a problem with development of properties, finding legal ways of not removing them, but finding another house for them.
Perhaps if I come in there.
Yes, please, Mr.
Terms Mr. Barton referred to the bat survey and potential need. That's in page 571 of your papers, which is the report of handling. It indicates the proposal involves alterations to the roof of the cottage, potential for bat roosts. Now, in terms of the options available to you today, in terms of this review, it's very clear that if you were considering this and potentially thinking, well, may go further forward on this one, then you would have to defer for a bat survey beforehand. Now, to be clear, to my limited knowledge of bat surveys, they are only undertaken in Scotland roughly April to mid-August.
Yes.
So there would be a delay, obviously, before that time period comes in, and the applicant would have to incur the cost of that bat survey. But that is a requirement. You have to do that before granting an application, as you would have in the other applications as well. Of course, it is open to you to refuse the application today, of course.
Thank you very much. Councillor Cuthbert, any questions before?
I'm just slightly confused as to why a bat survey needs to be done on this specific extension. Was there evidence found on site? I mean, it was a site visit carried out. It's just that if any house in the countryside might have the same problem. And looking at that house, it doesn't, from the pictures I can see, I can't see any access routes for the bats. So I'm confused about the necessity of a bat survey. Do we have any information on that?
The report of handling states that there was no site visit carried out by the case officer. The mention in the case officer's report on the potential for bats simply states the proposal involves alterations to the roof of the cottage, which has the potential for bats and bat roosts, I beg your pardon, as stated in Annex B of the Perth and Kinross Council's bat surveys guidance document. And the case officer points out that bats are a protected species, so it is necessary to secure an ecological survey to identify the presence of any bats or bat roosts, so that an assessment can be made prior to any planning permission being granted.
Right.
Can I come back on that?
Yep, certainly. Come back.
Yeah, it's just if there's been no site visit, and I can't see visually on the images that there's an access route in for the bats, are we not kind of setting a precedent that any house in the countryside where you're going to change the house roof would require a bat survey? I'm just worried about the setting of precedent here. Me personally, I would like someone to go and have a look and say, yes, there is the potential for bats, rather than just there might be.
Fine. Okay, then may I suggest, Ms. Ray's agreement, that we defer a decision on this case. We seek further information from planners and development management, if you wish to call it, why a bat survey is required, because we obviously seem to have some doubt if the bats are there. It may be they're in there's some outbuildings, I think, that's the bird they look like to me on the aerial photographs.
Yes,
And it may be they're in there if they are there.
I would consider that's probably more likely,
Yeah.
Chair, because the outbuildings are quite extensive and they were likely to have gaps for bats to fly in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if that's your agreement, Mr. Earl, I think we should defer this for further information from development management as to why a bat survey should be required.
Just writing down, I think actually you could go around here, but it's the chief biodiversity officer. She's the one that
Right, okay.
would be able to assess, and perhaps already has done. I don't know.
Yeah,
It's not clear.
Maybe,
I
yeah.
think.
Yeah.
So to prepare for further information from the council's, let's see, just call her biodiversity.
Biodiversity officer, keep it general. Yes.
Biodiversity. This is the biodiversity side. As to whether and why a bat survey may be required for this particular proposal.
Property, yes.
I would welcome a site visit by somebody as well. Just, I don't know whether that would be included in it.
I think you would have to give it to the biodiversity officer discretion, and I'm
Okay.
well aware that she knows the guidance on the bats
fine,
and the bats, etc. So, but I think those comments could be passed on, but whether she does or not, she may feel she doesn't need to. But
That's fine.
that would, I'm not clear that whether we need to develop management, the planning officer's comments. It's really the biodiversity officer.
Right, yes, yeah.
I'm
fine with that.
management, I think, would follow the biodiversity
Yeah,
officer.
I'm happy with that, yes.
Yes.
In agreement with that.
Okay.
Yep, yep. Fine. That then takes us through to number 4.6, which is, no, I've jumped one. I beg your pardon. It's my best one now. My pages have come together. Found it. 4.6, it's the S42, section 42 application to remove a condition 3 occupancy of planning permission 04000351 staff accommodation at Craig Rack Hotel, Moulin Road, Pitlochry. Mr. Vernon, if you can come in on this one, please.
Thank you, Chair. The aerial photograph of this site wasn't, well, it was available, but it was so blurred as to be useless. So I would draw your attention instead to page 621 of the papers, just which is the site plan, location plan for the application. On that drawing, you can see where the word hotel is. The building that's the subject of the application is in the, obviously, the top right of the red line area. You can see a projection from the rear of the hotel, which goes as far as the boundary, which basically is the building you can see there in the lighter render with the slated roof with the Velux. So that's the view looking in from the car park across the hotel car park at what is mostly the rear of the hotel. So you can see from that there's a car park and a wooden fence area and storage area, and beyond that is the application property, which was built as an extension to the hotel to form accommodation for manager or employees of the hotel. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. There we are. Thank you. So you can see the proximity of the building to the hotel. The 3 windows upstairs. It's not a large house. The windows on the side of the house of the building you can see are the only windows of the building. There are no buildings on the other side there are no windows on the other side of the building or on the gables. And the timber fence you can see in front of you is partly a smoking area for the hotel and partly storage for the hotel. Next slide, please. So inside the front yard of the building, you can see double doors which are proposed to be removed and made into a front door for the building, because at the moment the front door is accessed through a kind of passageway from the hotel. Next slide, please. And that's standing in the area in front of the house, in front of the building, looking towards the gable of the hotel. And you can see that the building is physically attached to the hotel. The wooden structure that you see in front of the building that forms part of the access to the building and also access to the hotel. Next slide, please. So this is looking at the current access to the building. You go down this passageway and you turn right at the bottom to go through a wooden gate into the yard in front of the building, and you go left to go into the hotel. Next slide, please. And that's the gate into the application property at the moment. You go into the yard at the front and then gain access that way. And the door that's to the left of that is a storage area for the pub. Next slide, please. And that's looking at that same door and storage building from the side of the yard in front of the application property. Next slide, please. Inside the application property, this is looking out through the French windows that were shown on an earlier slide, and this would form the front door to the house if the application were to be granted. Next slide, please. And another slide showing the view out to the paved area, which is to the front of the house, which would be the house's sole amenity area. Next slide, please. Oh, that's us, right, and the row. I think if we go back to the first slide, please. No, the first slide, please. Yeah, that one. So this application is under section 42 of the Planning Act to remove condition 3, occupancy. Planning permission granted in 2004 to build the property to provide staff accommodation at the Craigvrack Hotel in Pitlochry. So planning permission for a 1.5-storey building attached to the Craigvrack Hotel to accommodate the manager and family was granted in 2004. The description of that application and the wording which is on the decision notice was erection of replacement 1.5-storey extension for owners' accommodation. The property has windows to the front overlooking a small yard area and the hotel car park. It contains a living room and kitchen downstairs and bedrooms upstairs. It's connected via an internal door to the hotel and has access via a gate from the yard area in front of the property to the hotel car park. To summarise the applicant's case, the applicant seeks to sell the property for residential purposes, but has been able to achieve a valuation because of condition 3 of the planning permission, which restricts occupancy to an owner, manager or employee of the hotel. A condition which controls occupancy is not generally supported by current government advice. A letter from the Chief Planner in 2011 advised that occupancy conditions are rarely appropriate and should be avoided. The letter noted that there can be difficulties in selling a house. This is the letter from the Chief Planner. A restrictive occupancy condition is in place. Guidance in the form of Circular 4, 1998, that these conditions in planning permissions contains the following advice to planning authorities. Conditions restricting occupancy to a particular occupier or class of occupier should only be used when special planning grounds can be demonstrated and where the alternative would normally be refusal of permission. Scottish planning policy also contains guidance on the use of conditions. It states that in remote rural areas, planning authorities should not impose occupancy restrictions on housing in order to ensure that redevelopment can help to sustain fragile communities. Condition does not meet the required tests as set out in the circular. It is not necessary in planning terms, as there is no harm to residential amenity, and members of staff do not need the accommodation provided. It's not relevant to planning. The condition cannot reasonably be enforced. It is unduly restrictive, so is not reasonable. The Chief Planner's letter makes this clear. The property is within the residential settlement of Pitlochry, and it's used by people other than associated with the hotel would have no impact on the residential amenity of neighbours. To summarise the report of handling, if this application were to be granted, it would not lawfully amend the permission for the original development, which would remain as an extension to the hotel to form a manager's accommodation. If there was an intention to utilise the extension as a separate planning unit from the main hotel operations, there would still be a requirement to apply for planning permission to change the use. It should be noted that the existing accommodation, by virtue of its relationship with the hotel, raises significant concerns in respect of the ability to provide an acceptable level of amenity and its potential impact on the operation of the hotel. As such, it's likely that any application for a change of use would not be supported. No public representations received. Material considerations. The government's guidance on the use of planning considerations is a material consideration. The Chief Planner's letter is also material, but in a limited way. It should be noted that it relates specifically to the use of an occupancy restriction on new rural housing, which is used often to restrict occupancy to someone involved in a rural business or farm work. It advises that the Scottish Government believes that occupancy restrictions are rarely appropriate and should generally be avoided, but that normal planning considerations should be used to evaluate the acceptability of a housing proposal. Observations on this. The government's guidance states, since planning conditions are concerned with the use of land rather than the identity of the user, the question of who is to occupy premises for which permission is to be granted will normally be irrelevant. Conditions restricting occupancy to a particular occupier or class of occupier should only be used when special planning grounds can be demonstrated and where the alternative would normally be to refuse permission. It is the case officer's opinion that permission would have been refused if the accommodation were to be used for mainstream housing, that is, sold on the open market, as that would not provide an acceptable level of amenity for the occupants and could impact on the functioning of the hotel. The point raised about the description of the original application is also relevant. The description is specific, and I would take the view that it would allow the council to take enforcement action if someone other than an owner, manager or employee of the hotel were to take up residence, regardless of the condition which is the subject of this appeal. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. Well, I'm open to questions, but I'll start off if I may. The question is, if we remove this this condition, where does that leave the property? Where does it leave us all?
I believe it would leave the property still requiring planning permission for change of use to residential use if it were to be sold on the open market, if it were to be used for residential use other than by an employee or manager of the hotel.
Right.
Yeah, perhaps if I come in.
Yes, Mr. Darcy.
Yes, you have a condition which obviously restricts the occupancy. If you remove that, you still have that building, that kind of annex is still accommodation to the hotel. So the use is hotel use, it's accommodation to the hotel. So certainly in my view, and I think Mr. Burton shares my view from what he just said, is that you would still require a planning application for change of use to make it residential. Right. So removing the condition, unfortunately, on this occasion would not, in my view, achieve what the applicant is seeking to achieve. You would still have an accommodation hotel use. And I'm fortified in that because of the circular that's been mentioned. And there's a different paragraph mentioned, I'll quote it very briefly. It's about staff accommodation, paragraph 98. Where in existing houses within the curtilage of another building and the two are in the same occupation, any proposal to occupy the two buildings separately is likely to amount to a material change of use. So that planning permission would be required for such a proposal, even in the absence of a condition. Now, in fairness, it does go on to say the planning authorities should normally consider such applications sympathetically. But my point there from a legal perspective, if you remove the condition, you've still got a use, it's hotel use, it's not residential use. You need a change of use application for that.
Okay.
Yeah, what would have to be sought here would be a subdivision of the hotel, in effect.
Okay. Councillor Anderson, questions?
Yes, I mean, not seeing the whole boundaries of the hotel. I'm looking to the west of the hotel. I don't know what it's like. Is that extension as such is very, very much part of the hotel.
yes.
It's got no privacy such if it was to be separated in occupation such. The yard, and I mean, I'm not sure the present entrance is a corridor, isn't it? It's very much part and parcel of the hotel. And it would detract from the hotel, I would think, if that was not freed off from the restriction.
I take your point, councillor, and I think that's part of that's something that would be resolved or would be attempted to be resolved if the applicants were instead to submit an application for a change of use. They would then have to show a separate access, or they'd have to show a separate amenity space and so on, which isn't the case just now.
Yeah.
Councillor Bell, any questions?
Yeah, I'm kind of curious. At the moment, we've got a section 42 which restricts the use of this building to staff occupancy. If that section 42 is lifted, what we're saying is that it will become hotel or holiday accommodation. So it could, for example, be used for holiday lets or Airbnb or something like that. Am I correct in saying that technically that can't be done at the moment, as it's accommodation for staff only?
Just to clarify, councillor, section 42 is the part of the act that the application is submitted under.
Right.
It's not the part of the act that fixes the occupation. It would certainly be an easier thing to do to make it part of the hotel, to make it remain part of the hotel, and to use the accommodation in the building for guest accommodation. I think that's not what's being sought here, obviously. I think, and maybe our legal representative could confirm that it's my understanding that there would still need to be some application to change that particular condition to allow it to be used as guest accommodation, but it's more likely to be acceptable, I would have thought, than the application that we have before us.
I think I would agree. The condition that you're looking at, I've got it in page 610 of the report of handling. The occupation of the dwelling house hereby shall be restricted to an owner, manager or employee of the Associated Craigbrack Hotel. Now, if you take that off, it becomes, I appreciate the original description in the granting the planning permission with staff accommodation by the looks of it, or owner's accommodation. It still remains the use would be accommodation for the hotel. So potentially you have a wider use, but it wouldn't be residential. And to add to what Mr. Burton said, we're kind of going off into different territory in the sense of the applicant has applied to remove the condition, in their view, to seek residential use, not to seek alternative hotel accommodation use. So that might be a consequence, but it's not actually what they're wanting.
Well, I'm confused by that. If we remove this condition 3, we're not consenting to residential use. That would require...
Not in my view, no. But all I've said, I have to say I'm not commenting on the validity of removing the condition or not. That's a matter for you. There can be reasons as to why that was put on, but the fundamental issue for the applicant remains that it wouldn't give them residential use. That would require a planning change of use application.
Yes, but where I'm trying to get to is, as far as I can see, removing this condition doesn't change the fact that it's hotel accommodation and it can't be sold as a residential unit. They would still have to go through the change of use application. So removing the condition doesn't really change things from the current position.
Well, it would change it in the sense that there would be possibility of it being used for letting accommodation, rented hotel accommodation. And of course, no real assessment's been done in relation to that, as I understand it. So there's a potential change there, but what is, I think, correct, Mr. Burton and I are agreed about, is it wouldn't give them the residential use. I've been careful not to give my views on the removal of the condition. We're describing what they want for you.
Yeah. Okay. That's it. Yeah, that's.
All right, members. So can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require any information? Councillor Cuthbert?
Happy to proceed.
Okay. So Councillor Cuthbert, would you like to lead off on this one?
Yeah, I'm minded to agree with the applicant and to uphold their application. My view really is that you're not going to change how that building can be used. To do that, they need change of use. So the effect of removing the condition 3 is it has no effect. It remains part of the hotel. So I'm quite relaxed about actually removing that condition. I'm not a great fan of conditions of this sort. My preference is that they shouldn't be restricted because the building's up, it's up, and that's the end of it.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll make a comment that I'm going to differ from you on this one, as we do sometimes.
Yep.
I feel that the applicant should be rejected. I think the property was put there on the basis of being attached to the hotel as owner's accommodation. That was the condition was put in. And that hasn't changed as far as I can see at this stage. It may well be that a change of usage may be a possible direction, but for the time being, I think this is it was built for a particular reason. It was built for owner's accommodation. That condition was put in. The new owners are aware of that when they bought the property, and that's why I can see no reason why to remove condition 3. If they wish to do something with the property, then there are other routes available to them, which I think they should pursue. So I'm refusing the application. Councillor Anderson.
Mindful of the same as the convener that the condition should not be removed and therefore reject the application.
Okay, so Councillor, sorry, Councillor Elliott, Mr. Elliott, we've got
Demoted.
oh, what demote or promote? You never know, do you? We have a majority decision on this one.
Yes, thank you, convener. I think to page 607 was the grounds of refusal. My understanding is by majority you've agreed, and I'm taking it that you've agreed to retain the same wording.
Yes.
The minority, Councillor Cuthbert, was removed on the basis that the condition is not necessary. The physiology.
Yeah.
So by 2-1, the application refused and refused.
Refused. That's correct. Well, thank you very much. Now we come on to the final paper for the day, number 5-1. This is a case which was originally deferred by another review body. At that time, I was the only one on the review body on that day. So, Mr. Burton, if you could give us a lead in on this one. It's the erection of a dwelling house in principle, land 20 metres north of Powder Wells Farm. So you can introduce the case from my two colleagues.
Yep.
Thank you.
I'll take you through the pictures as ever. This is the red line plan you can see there. It's in the countryside across a single track access road from a small development which has an existing house and I think from memory two potential houses for conversion from outbuildings. Next slide, please. So the access road, the outbuildings which are proposed to be or which have consent to be converted into housing are on your left-hand side, and this is looking back along the access road. The application site is on the right-hand side. Next slide, please. And this shows the more of the application site itself. It's formerly held buildings which are believed to have been thought to have been barn type buildings. Next slide, please. Looking into the site itself, you can see there's a low wall on the left hand side. There's not much else that's left of any note. The base of the site, some of it is it's just rough ground, but it's compacted. Some of it is a concrete platform. Next slide, please. And you can see low walls and a line of what used to be I think the wall of the barn, these upright posts on top of a retaining wall. Next slide, please. So the site is clearly previously two types of buildings. One, this when I was out on site, this looked to me as if it used to be a yard area, and the other side of it, which is shown in the previous photograph, was a building. Next slide, please. And that's one of the outbuildings which is proposed, which has permission to be turned into a house. Next slide, please. So the permission is sought in principle for a single house on the site. You can see there. The land is previously occupied by buildings associated with the farmsteading on the other side of the road, of the access road. The application site is surrounded to the north, east and west by open and to the south by vacant former farm buildings. Former farmsteadings have consent granted in May 2022 for two houses, one a conversion of the existing buildings and one a new build house. In addition, there is an existing farm cottage adjacent to these two buildings. The application site is on the opposite side of the road from the farmsteading and has the remains of structures which clearly formed part of the working farm. There appear to be two structures of which concrete hard standings, foundations and low walls remain. To summarise the applicant's case, the applicant should be assessed against policy 19 of the local development plan housing in the countryside. That policy supports proposals for the erection of single houses in the countryside in 6 categories, the 6th of which is development on rural brownfield land. The adopted supplementary guidance on housing in the countryside carries specific guidance on this category. Rural brownfield land is defined there as derelict land which is at one time occupied by buildings and structures which have been removed, or land directly linked to former buildings and structures which has been so damaged by former use that it cannot be left to naturalise or be used for another purpose without being improved. The guidance adds that proposals will be considered under this category for sites which have either been completely cleared of all buildings and structures or where some foundations remain, providing that buildings above ground level have been removed. It's contended that the application site is exactly the type of site the policy and supplementary guidance supports. A small-scale housing proposal on derelict land which was at one point occupied by buildings which have been removed and where some foundations remain. The report of handling justifies the refusal on the basis that there is no evidence that the site is contaminated to the extent that it must be remediated. Supplementary guidance does not require a contaminated land investigation to be submitted in all cases. It's not considered that such an investigation would have added anything to the consideration of a derelict brownfield site that could not be left to naturalise, and hence complies with the guidance and supplementary guidance. It's noted that the Environmental Health Services response to the application recommends a condition is applied to any consent requiring a contamination evaluation carried out. The applicants would be happy with such a condition. So the proposal is considered to meet the requirements of Category 6 of Policy 19 and the supplementary guidance. To summarise the report of handling, the report assesses the proposal against Policy 19. The site appears to comply with the definition of brownfield land in the policy and accompanying supplementary guidance, but no evidence has been submitted that shows that the site is contaminated to the extent that it must be remediated. The intention of Category 6 of the policy and guidance is to allow development on cleared sites which have been significantly degraded by former use, to the extent that the development of a house is the only means by which it's viable to remediate the site. The site has not been demonstrated to be in such a poor condition that it requires to be remediated, that is, its condition is causing a risk to human health or the wider environment. Material considerations. The overriding material consideration is Policy 19 of the Local Development Plan and the supporting supplementary guidance. Category 6 of that policy concerns the development of rural brownfield land, which both the applicant and the case officer agree defines the application site. Since the application was first presented to the local review body, the applicant has submitted information from a desktop contamination study of the site. This is contained on pages 704 to 744 of the papers before you. The crucial part of this of the study, Table 6, can be found on page 716. Table 6 shows that the risk associated with the contamination thought to be on the site is low, with the exception of a moderate risk from direct human contact with demolition debris. The Council's Contamination Officer advises, on page 746 of your papers, that the study shows that the appeal site does not present a significant risk to human health. And the Planning Case Officer, on page 745 of your papers, concludes that the report submitted does not provide the justification as required by the policy. Now, Chair, would it help if I read out the precise wording of the policy just now for committee?
I think it would just help just a little bit, yeah.
Okay. Right, policy 19, category 6, development on rural brownfield land. And this is the specific wording in the local development plan. Sites where some contamination is present may not require to be remediated if there is no significant risk to human health or the wider environment. This category of the policy is not intended to allow the redevelopment of sites like these, nor is it intended to permit the redevelopment of sites for housing where buildings have simply been allowed to fall into disrepair. This category is intended to allow small-scale housing proposals on cleared sites which have been significantly degraded by a former use or activity, and where the redevelopment of the site for housing is the only means by which it is viable to remediate the site. Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you very much.
Mayor, just to interrupt, I think Mr. Barton said that was policy 19. It's actually the supplementary guidance that's going on.
There's the supplementary guidance from
In category 6, isn't it? Yeah.
policy 19.
Well, open up the questions. If I may, Mr. If I can ask you a question first of all, this comes back to supplementary guidance, the definition. I've read it through. It says, in the way it's written, derelict land which was at one time occupied by buildings or structures, but these have now been removed, comma, or land directly linked to former buildings, blah, 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 blah. The way I read it in that comma, there are two separate definitions. Am I looking at it the wrong way? So it's saying it can be either derelict land which is at one time occupied by buildings or structures, but these have now been removed, comma, or land which is coming. You see what I'm saying? Yeah.
And I would accept you can see it that way. However, what I would say is looking at the whole of category 6, and whilst a proposal may meet the definition of rural brownfield land, that isn't the end of the process.
Okay.
Because what Mr. Burton then read out was the paragraph below.
Right, I'm with you.
Just because it's rural brownfield land does not mean to say that it falls within the requirements or the criteria for development.
Right.
There has to be more than that. There
Right,
has to be something that could only be the contamination remediated, through this.
So it's although it's a separate definition.
It's not just
It's not. It then
It
steps
leads
into
on from the
Right,
definition.
Okay, fine.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. Okay, fine. Thank you very much. Councillor Anderson, any questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, I just wondered, having seen the site, when the planning commission granted to upgrade the properties on the other side, on the south side of it, when was that issued?
That was issued in 2022. May.
So it's just very recent as well.
2022. Yes.
And the photograph we got on page 7, which actually shows buildings on the site.
Yes.
And that has been dated when it was 207,
That's
year of
yeah.
photography. So there were buildings.
Yes, yes, that's true. That's something submitted by the applicant in the current. Said yes.
So it's not all that long since there were agricultural buildings and structure on that site.
Any further questions for me?
Happy with that reassurance.
That's good.
Yeah, I'm just confused. On page 659, photograph 6, and on the next page on 12, what is that made up of? Is that concrete or is it some sort of hardcore or? In other words, what is the site? Because to me, that looks like a concrete plinth of some sort.
There was a picture of it. I think one of the pictures showed it
One
clearly.
of the pictures shows yes. Just trying to get to page 659. Oh yes, yes. Right.
I'm just wondering, is it a concrete plinth we're talking about?
They look to me to be a concrete base.
Right.
Previous building still remaining on site. Yes.
And that'll take a while to degrade, presumably.
I would imagine so, yes.
Any further questions?
No, I think that's me.
Could I just come back one thing, Mr. Burton? You mentioned about the buildings opposite, the old farm buildings opposite. There is planning permission on those, is there?
It was granted in May 2022 for two houses. One to be a conversion of the existing buildings and one new built house. And in addition, there's an existing farm cottage just behind these buildings, adjacent to the two dwellings, which will be built. Yes.
So planning permission exists, but obviously nothing's been done to them at the moment.
No site start when I visited. That was in the summer.
The reason I ask is, well, I can recall when we had this before us, and one of my colleagues, who's not on the panel with us today, I think queried whether you could stretch that to class as a building group, even though it's only planning permission. Yeah, I mean, it's only two anyway, but this will make up, I think, his thoughts was about this being the third.
Well,
and the other point was, of course, it's still only planning. It's not, they haven't,
Yes,
there's
that's
done.
right.
So
Yeah.
that was, I think, in his thinking.
at the moment, there's one house there. And there are two houses, the planning permission for a further two.
So there's one house at the back,
There's one house at the back,
two outbuildings.
planning permission for two, which are closer to the application site.
Right, so
So
eventually you would have three, if they had been done, there would be a group of three already.
there will be a group of three when that's implemented.
Going back, his thought was,
Yes.
are you on the?
I understand. Yes, I was there, convener, but I'm not back in terms of what. Refer you to the building groups category where it's defined as three or more existing buildings of a size equivalent cottage. If the other two are built, then presumably what it would then be assessed as to whether this would be extending into a definable site.
Yes.
But there'd be a different assessment at the time when the two are built.
So, yes, I was just trying to follow through his thinking of,
Yeah.
fine,
I seem to remember the discussion last time
yes.
going around whether or not that, or the weight to be given to that, because that consent might not be implemented. Yeah, so
I know. So, members, without no further questions, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation of the planning advisor. Or do we require any further information? Councillor Anderson
To proceed.
and Councillor Cuthbert?
I'm happy to proceed.
I too am happy to proceed. So, Councillor Anderson, would you like to lead on this one?
I would like to allow a house on this site, development of it, restricted to single story. So this clear view doesn't restrict the houses that are on to be developed on the other side of the road. And if it's restricted to single story, I'm happy to grant the appeal for that site. It has been built on, little sir.
I'm not sure. It's an,
There's photographs of the building on that side.
Mr. Elliott, can I just, could we condition that? It's only in principle anyway, but.
I'm not sure I caught it exactly, but you can, well, first of all, Councillor Anderson, you would need to provide a justification as to why you consider this.
Or some housing group in the countryside, we're almost, one way or other, we're almost.
Well, we'd have to be clear which category you're, bearing in mind previous comments, focusing on the housing countryside policy, the brownfield land category. It's where there are sites where the canalisation can only be remediated through this. And my understanding is the information there doesn't establish that. In terms of building groups, the supplementary guidance is quite clear that it's defined as three or more existing buildings. So not potential, but existing buildings. So again, I'd have to ask what your justification is to grant.
Well, the timing of things is not in my control. When these come on, the time is not in the applicant's control. When these start or are completed.
Yeah.
The permission has been granted, so.
I mean, that's correct. However, it's not, I think what you're saying is you would grant it contrary to policy. Would that be correct? Taking into account the permission.
Fortunately, yes, as it stands at present.
Sorry, then in terms of condition, conditioning it single story, maybe Mr. Burton can comment. I think that's possible, but
Yes,
it's always possible to also apply not to comply with those conditions in the future.
it's perfect. I mean, the application's for permission in principle. So a further application would need to be brought forward for the details of the house. But it's perfectly proper for the committee to attach a condition saying no more than 1 story. But as our legal advisors just pointed out, leave open to the applicant if they chose to submit an application to have that condition removed. But that would be a separate matter, of course.
So Councillor Cuthbert, your thoughts?
You go first if you would.
Mulling it over. My thoughts on this one are a mixed one, I'm afraid. The foundations are there, and the building on which was built on those has long been removed. But as our legal advisors pointed out, whilst the definition is clear, it leads on into other requirements of which contamination of the land needs to be proved. We have got a desktop contamination report, as Mr. Burton has mentioned, but it has come back saying across the board, I think, page 716, that most of it is just moderate, contamination is moderate, and therefore, really and truly, I think that lays it outside of category 6 of the supplementary guidance. I also note that the agent has pointed out that there's going to be potentially some changes coming from the Scottish Government on the National Planning Framework number 4, which he comments reuse of brownfields land where a return to a natural state was not or will not happen without intervention. And of course, with the foundation concrete foundations, it wouldn't return without intervention. But the important point in his paragraph is that it will shortly be adopted, and it is that will shortly, which is the overriding phrase of the paragraph. Given that we have to comply with our own guidance at this stage, and with the comments made by the contamination report and the return comments by our own development management planning officer, I feel therefore that I would have to refuse the appeal for the application on those grounds. It just doesn't comply with category 6. There are perhaps there are arguments obviously both ways regarding the definition, but as I queried it and as it's come back to us, that definition leads us into another requirement, and that is for the contamination report. I appreciate the comments Councillor Anderson made regarding the other buildings and that there is planning already in place, but of course the work hasn't started. I know that was a comment that came up in the previous time we reviewed this application, but it is just planning only, and the work hasn't been done, and obviously there's no guarantee it would be done. So overall, I have to reject the application, reject the appeal for the application, and stand by the comments made by the planning officer. There is, I think, a slight amendment perhaps to the wording, but we'll see what Councillor Cuthbert says before we go to that point.
I'm really struggling with this one because there's so many different aspects that come into it. I don't think it does conform to the housing and the countryside rules in terms of brownfield site, but there is this large concrete plinth that's going to take hundreds of years to disappear and is currently an eyesore. There's also this question of, is it in a building group? Well, if the consent's given, that is kind of a material consideration in my mind, because chances are it's going to happen. So I'm actually with Councillor Anderson on this one, and I would propose to uphold the appeal and to set the condition, as Councillor Anderson has, to put in a single-storey property on this site, specifically with the purpose of clearing up that concrete plinth, which, as I say, is an eyesore. And if you're building these houses opposite and looking at the house opposite, it looks quite a nice building that could look quite nice. Having a large concrete plinth, which presumably gets muddy and dirty and horrible outside, isn't a good thing. I'd prefer to see a house there. So that's my position.
Okay. That's right. Up. We have a majority decision on this.
I'm going to get told off. I should say as well, I don't think MPF4 at the moment is perhaps a material consideration, but it does seem to be leaning in this direction as well. So
Agreed.
What I have is by majority 2-1 grant. That would be subject to suitable conditions and informatives on the basis that while it's not compliant with supplementary guidance, that there is planning permission in place, which and view it as a building group, and primarily also to remove the concrete plinth.
yes, you could also say that it's that site is bounded by the concrete and that area of collapsed buildings, etc. I think it's a particular case, this one. It's not a general.
Not an easy one to say. I agree.
Okay.
You might also, is there a majority for a single story?
Yes.
Additional single story as well?
yeah.
I didn't know you mentioned that. Okay. Right.
Everybody, well, that brings us to the end of this meeting of local review bodies. It shows we're not always unanimous, and all of us can be in a minority sometimes. So that's the way it should be. Of course, we will make our own decisions on the day. It only leaves me to thank all of you for being here today. It's been a long session, I know, but we've got through it all. And finally, of course, well, as we are this time of year, wish you all a very Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. Hope you're happier New Year this year coming. So our best wishes to you all for the season. And thank you again for your time.
Thank you, Convener.
Thanks for coming.